What was your topic though, Michelle? Again?
The Bloody Bender.
Bloody Benders.
Yeah. The blenders. The benders.
The bloody blender?
The buddy bloody bender. Blenders?
The bloody bender.
The bloody buddy blender benders.
There you go.
But Bender's their last name.
Benders. Oh, okay. I thought it was like a ghost that just bends. Imagine that. Like that's.
Yes. I can't imagine that, and I hate.
Yeah, it just like.
I hate what you've just said.
Like, welcome to Scary Mystery Surprise,
where we talk about scary things that surprised us around the internet.
I'm Edwin.
I'm Michelle. Wow. Are we ready?
We're ready.
Are we ready? Okay, we have to get in the time machine.
Let's go.
Are those your new time machine glasses?
Yeah.
The doilies?
Eye protection, guys.
For those who can't see Edwin, he has a blanket on his head, and now he has doilies in front of his eyes for some reason.
It's for audio.
The doilies?
No, the blanket.
Okay, we got to get in the time machine.
Let's go.
Ready?
In the washing machine.
I mean, it does both things, but it takes gasoline. Oh, we're here. Good.
You almost went too much.
Yeah, it went too far. It's October of 1870. You have no idea when that is, do you?
Nope. I was trying to imagine.
No, we're in the West. It's a couple years after the Civil War. You're traveling, you, Edwin, along a newly opened Kansas territory. It's time to find adventure and fortune after the war, and you want to explore the West. Kansas is still wild, and you haven't passed any travelers on this road for quite a while. You notice it's getting late, and you're tired, and your back hurts, and you're hungry, and off in the distance you see a nice cabin, and on that cabin it says The Bender Inn and Grocery. Friendly smoke drifts out of the chimney. The aroma of something delicious on the wind hits your nose.
So nice.
Yeah, so pleasant. I mean, I imagine it's probably dusk, and it's you hear the sound of the horse clopping.
Yep.
You know, you're on your horse, and you're like, oh, that'll be a nice place to rest. You set up your horse in the barn and enter the inn. You're welcomed by a beautiful young woman. She says her name is Kate. You ask for a meal and a place to rest. The young man at the counter takes your money. Kate introduces him as her brother, John Jr., and Kate escorts you to the head of the table as an older woman, probably her mother, places a big plate of stew in front of you.
Ooh.
Smells good. Then, bam! Everything goes black.
Am I dead?
Yeah.
It's a nice way to go. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I mean, everything's been pretty good up until that moment, so it's not bad. It's not bad, especially after all the horrors you've seen during the Civil War. So, worse ways to go.
That must suck, though. You survive all that, and then you just died.
Yeah. So, I tried to write some jingles for, basically I wrote, welcome to the Bender Inn.
Ooh.
Welcome to the Bender Inn, your home away from home. And then I wrote, well, I feel like I quote the Eagles too many times on here because it's you could check out, but you could never leave. Like that.
Such a good line, though. That's why.
It is, but we use it all the time. We've used it at least one, but probably two other.
I think two.
Yeah, I think two. Even if it's gotten cut out, we've definitely used it. And then don't go on a bender at the Bender Inn. And then here's a story about the bloody benders who were bringing up two very awful kids. All of them loved gold, but also murder. And then I couldn't think of the last. And then it just says the youngest one in curls, which you might have had.
Yeah, it's possible.
Anyway, this might sound like a scene from some sort of horror movie, but it's actually a true story behind the first family of serial killers, the Benders. After the Civil War in the 1860s, many Americans wanted to open up the Kansas Territory to homesteading, but there was a problem because the Osage Indian tribe was still there, and in the classic American style, they were relocated by the government to a reservation in Oklahoma. And so basically this trail that they marched the Osage down became the main road, the only road open at the time for traveling farther west. So that's where this road is. In October 1870, a man and his son, John Bender Sr., around 60 years old at the time, believed to be a German immigrant, and John Bender Jr., around 25 at this time, settled in the county with 4 other families. The Benders settled a 160-acre homestead that faced the Osage Trail. Okay, so they built their cabin right by this trail, the main road to the west. If you wanted to go further west, you had to go by the Benders' cabin. Ooh. So once they built this cabin, and they built a barn and a corral, they sent for the mother and the daughter to join them. And in 1871, Miss Elvira Bender, 55 years old, who spoke very little English at that time, and her daughter, Miss Kate Bender, 23, who spoke fluent English, arrived at the cabin. John Sr., John Sr. was described by those around him as, quote, as a repulsive, hideous brute, without any redeeming trait, dirty, profaned, ill-tempered, and it was generally believed that his son, John Jr., was a dimwit. Because he
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, nobody really liked this family. That John Jr. was a dimwit because he had a tendency to laugh at anything the neighbors said, and that seeing John Jr. excited brought a grave-robbing hyena to mind, which is a quote from someone who knew them, like a neighbor.
What does that sound like?
I'm imagining someone who laughs at inappropriate times.
Because I thought, like, the way that they laugh or sound, like this is annoying, high pitched, like that.
I don't know. I don't know if that's it,
but I mean, I guess it could be like you laugh at inappropriate times. Wow.
But also grave robbing hyena, which is like, what is that? What is a grave robbing hyena? Also, at the time, how did they know what hyenas were?
Right, like. Do they have hyenas?
Not in Kansas.
What about in Germany?
Maybe someone went to a zoo. I don't know.
They had zoos back then?
I think so, yeah. I mean, kings always had weird little things where they kept animals, but I don't know how common hyenas were. Anyway, Elvira, a.k.a. Ma, was notorious, ill-tempered, and called a she-devil and a dirty old Dutch crone.
Jeez. I like the insults, though. Those are, like, very...
I know, me too. And so they really thought about it. And I honestly hope I get described as that one day. That's an honor that I'm hoping to achieve.
A grave-robbing hyena.
Yeah, that's the one I'm still stuck on, because it was in multiple locations. And so it was like, I wasn't going to include it, but then it's like, was in multiple sources of research, where I'm like, why does this quote keep coming up? So it was the quote about him where he just inappropriately laughed.
What is a grave robbing hyena?
Is it anything? Or is it just...
Ugh. So just a hyena then, because in the Middle East, striped hyenas have been recorded digging up graves. The link with grave robbing or eating human remains has added to the horror with which they are viewed. So it's just a hyena. Like, that's the hyena.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I'll put a pin in that, because that might explain more as we go forward. So anyway, we get to Kate, the beautiful youngest of all the Benders. Kate stirred up the settlers by not only being pretty, but she was a self-proclaimed healer and psychic, and she held seances to speak to the dead. And she openly practiced and gave lectures on spirituality and her ability to cure illness, which was not unheard of at the time. So she was like a spiritualist. So I guess they were all spiritualists. However, she did cause quite a scandal when it became known that she supported free love outside of marriage, free love in general, which is pretty progressive and shocking at the time. But either way, she was into it. And then I found this other quote, courtesy of Wikipedia. It's, Kate proclaimed herself responsible to no one save herself. She professed to be a medium of spiritualism and delivered lectures on the subject. In her lectures, she publicly declared that murder might be for good, in that what the world might deem villainy, her soul might read bravery, nobility, and humanity. She advocated free love and denounced all social regulations for the promotion of purity and the prevention of carnality, which she has called miserable requirements of self-constituted society. She maintained carnal relations with her brother and boldly proclaimed her right to do so. Shall we confine ourselves to a single love and deny our natures their proper sway? Even though it be a brother's passion for his own sister, I say it should not be smothered.
The voice. First of all, the voice.
Look, I'm channeling Kate right now. And anyway, she was into doing it with her brother and doing it with whoever. So that drew the people in. People like to go to the vendors.
In summary, that was like what happened.
Needless to say, their business was doing great. And in 1871, it was enough to draw people to the inn to see what all the hype was about. And the inn itself was a fairly large one-room cabin. The Benders decided to hang a large sheet of canvas to separate the cabin into two parts. The back was their living quarters, and the front housed a small general store, kitchen, and the dining area.
Wow. Sounds like a big place, though. Still.
Look, there's not a lot going on out on the prairie. If someone's like, oh, I'm going to do a seance. Oh, I'm going to sleep with my brother. Oh, I'm going to like...
People just want to go watch.
Yeah.
I meant like the seance.
But also like yes and no. Not a lot to do. Not a lot to do.
It's like now though, like we watch, you know, when people they clean the hooves off of horses and donkeys and we just sit there watching a video for like half an hour.
So much. I watch those all the time. I can't stop.
That's what I imagined back then. Like, hey guys, I'm going to go kill a chicken. All right, I'll go. And then they go watch. It's like free entertainment.
Anyway, we have a bit of a scene change. The idyllic prairie scene turned grisly in May 1871, when a man's body was found in a nearby creek. His skull was bashed in and his throat was slit. And in February 1872, the bodies of two more men were found nearby with the same gruesome injuries. And by the fall of 1872, news of the brutal murders and of several unexplained disappearances had spread far and wide, and people were afraid to travel the route, so they avoided it altogether. There were like stories of it being paranormal and all sorts of things. So in the early spring of 1873, a man named George Newton Landcourt was traveling to Iowa with his 18-month-old daughter, Mary Ann, when they both disappeared. Which, also impressive that he's traveling with, what, like a 2-year-old? That's like a 2-year-old, right?
Yeah, wow.
A year and a half, whatever. Whatever. What do babies need time for?
I mean, they grow pretty quickly, so like a 2-year-old versus a year and a half is like a few pounds difference. It's like Robbie versus like small pit bull.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for using dogs, because now I understand. So they both disappeared. Soon afterwards, a Dr. William Henry York, who had sold them the horses and the wagon, became concerned when the horses and wagon were found abandoned. And Dr. York set out to find Landcourt and Mary Ann and followed the homesteading trail to Fort Scott and interviewed people along the way. Once he got to Fort Scott, he identified the horses and the wagons as the ones that he had sold to Landcourt. He wanted to return to Independence, Kansas, but he never made it. He decided to stop at the Bender Inn, and he was never heard from again. While the Benders seemed to have free reign in their deadly game, they made a big mistake. Dr. York was from a very prominent family, and his brothers were Colonel Ed York and the Senator Alexander M. York, So anyway, Colonel York organized a 75-man search party to track down his brother, and they ultimately tracked Dr. York's last movements to the Bender Inn. And in March 1873, Colonel York interviewed the Benders, but they denied all knowledge of the missing man, and within a few weeks, Colonel York heard rumors that a woman claimed to have barely escaped when Elvira attacked her with a knife. So Colonel York, on April 3rd, Colonel York returned to the Bender Inn with the new accusations. During the second interview, Elvira tried hard to hide it, but ultimately she blew it by ranting about how the woman had cursed her coffee. Personally, I just love that Elvira couldn't keep it together long enough.
It's her fault.
To just be like, that girl had it coming. She cursed my coffee. I'll stab her again if she ever comes here. And I'll keep stabbing her.
Just like I killed all these other men.
I stabbed all these other men. Whoops. After her outburst, Elvira threw Colonel York and his men out. Unfortunately for the Benders, the damage had been done, and around this time, word started spreading among the homesteaders about disappearances and mutilated bodies. Days later, the neighbors noticed that the animals on the Bender farm were dying and starving. The place seemed to be abandoned. Basically, an elected official in town named Leroy Dick went to the Bender farm to investigate. He noticed a truly awful odor coming from under the trapdoor in the house. He called for a search party, and hundreds of homesteaders armed with pickaxes and shovels turned up. They couldn't begin to guess the horrific scene that waited for them. Under the trapdoor was a secret room. Blood had clotted and soaked into the stone floor and into the dirt underneath. There were no bodies, however. This made them spread out and search the property. In the area of the orchard and the garden, Dr. York's body was found, buried in a shallow grave. The next day, 10 bodies were recovered, as well as a gruesome assortment of body parts. All the bodies had their skulls bashed in and their throats slit. However, little Mary Ann Lancourt, 18 months old, appeared to have been buried alive.
Oh, no.
And to make the scene even worse, many of the bodies were described to have been indecently mutilated, suggesting some sort of sexual torture.
Well, I'm glad that first death was just you're eating stew and good night, and that's it. That's a good way to go.
Yeah. Who's to say what they did to your dead corpse, you know? From what they saw, it soon became clear how the Benders caused the sad demise of so many unsuspecting travelers. So the victims would enter the inn, be given a seat at the dinner table over the trap door. Once seated, one of the men would hide behind the canvas and smash the victim's skull with a hammer. And then one of the women would slit the victim's throat and drop them through the trap door into the secret room below. Later, the body would be dismembered or just buried. Any valuables on their person would be taken by the Benders. But the thing is that many of the victims were not wealthy or in possession of valuables. It appeared that they were killed more for sport than for money. And there were about a dozen bullet holes in the cabin, suggesting that some of the victims tried to fight back.
With guns and stuff.
Yeah. But also you're up against like 4 people. And think about how vulnerable you are when you're like you're tired, you think you're safe, you're like ready to relax, and then all of a sudden you have to go into fight or flight mode.
Wow. So they actually serve the food.
Yeah.
Or just you sit down and then they're just
and then they go bam. And then you're
dead.
Maybe conscious enough to pull a gun, but there's 4 of them and you're incapacitated, so.
You gotta be careful.
Weird shit. Very few of the Benders' possessions were left in the cabin by the time the neighbors came to inspect it. At this point, nobody knows who the Benders really were or where they went when they abandoned the farm. The Benders seem to have ridden off into the folklore of Kansas. Senator York and Governor Thomas Osborne offered a substantial reward for the capture of the Benders, but to this day that reward has never been claimed. As for the Benders, one rumor stated that Ma and Pa fled back to St. Louis, Missouri, and the other stated that John Jr. and Kate hitched a ride on the railroad down to an outlaw camp between the borders of Texas and New Mexico. A detective claimed that he personally chased John Jr. to the border, but found him dead. Some neighbors also claimed that John Jr. and Kate were a couple instead of being brother and sister.
Or both. It couldn't have been both.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. Actually, neighbors thought they were common law married because she was very open about sexual relations with John Jr. It is also suspected that the only members of the family, or the only members who were actually related in the Bender family, were the mother and daughter. And it's also thought that none of them were actually named Bender. They were all, however, serial killers. So that's like...
A common bond, a strong family bond.
Yeah, I mean, what else would make a family besides all killing together, you know? Like,
family that kills together stays together.
At least for a while, anyway. In 1884, I mean, the easiest way, I think, to get away would be to split up. You couldn't ever all stay together. You'd have to all split up. But, I mean, they've never been caught. They've never been found. Here are some like possible theories of people that might have been them, but nobody knows. So there's a guy that they think might have been Paul Bender who was arrested in Idaho for killing someone with a hammer. And so they think he might have been Pa Bender. And when the authorities tried to get a description of the wanted man from Kansas, they soon found the prisoner had cut off his own foot and bled to death before positive identification could be made.
Oh, wow. Okay, because they would tie him up like that?
Well, like he was chained up and he cut off his own foot to get out of the chain, and then he bled to death, which is like, okay. And then by the time it was impossible to make an identification because of decomposition and because everything took so long. So, like, there was no way to figure out if that was actually John Bender Sr. or not. And then in 1889, a mother and daughter named Elmira and Sarah Elizabeth were arrested for larceny in Michigan. Suspicious. That's all I'm saying. Elmira.
Is that even a name? Just kidding.
I think yeah. They were, of course, accused of being Elvira and Kate Bender and were sent to Kansas for identification. However, the women were sent back to Michigan when the eyewitness descriptions were just, they couldn't get accurate descriptions. So they were just too inconsistent. So it's thought that Elvira is actually Elmira Mark from the Adirondack Mountains area and was rumored to have many children from many different men. And it's rumored that many of her husbands died of head injuries. It's also thought that Kate was actually Elmira's fifth child, Eliza Griffith. John Sr. is thought to be John Flickinger, an immigrant from either Germany or the Netherlands. While it is true that the Benders never faced justice for their crimes, there were some individuals who did. A total of 12 men were charged with accessory to helping getting rid of the stolen property. So like fencing their stolen property.
Wow.
So the Bender victims, it's thought that Benders killed maybe around a dozen people, including one child, although it could be as high as 21. Nobody knows.
Wow.
But they did find some hammers when the townsfolk all went into the house. You know, it was basically picked clean when they were looking for the Benders, but they have found some hammers, and those now reside in a museum in Cherryville, Kansas.
That is now owned by...
in the Cherryville Museum.
Zach Vegas.
Yeah, but now owned by Zach Vegas. But it's on display if you want to go see it. So we'll never know what actually happened to the Benders. They kind of got away with it. Seems like kind of a lucrative scheme they had. But yeah.
To just steal stuff from travelers and mutilate bodies.
Yeah, I mean, this legend of the Untamed West is still very much alive. So.
And, you know, I still imagine stuff like that happens, like out in dirt roads and old cabins and stuff like that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, your car breaks down.
I think of the movie The Hills Have Eyes.
100%.
Oh, that was
I have never watched it all the way through, but in high school, we were walking down to a beach, and my friend kept being like, The hills have eyes. The hills have eyes. So we had to sprint up a hill to get back to our car. So just to even whisper the hills have eyes, you should probably just go back to your car. A bunch of teens sprinting.
That reminds me, one time, those racist parts of California?
Yeah.
One time we were like driving by, wanted to just see the stars out by like, I don't know where we were. I forgot where we were. My friends, if they're listening, they remember. As soon as we parked, we just got a big old spotlight, like a headlight, just a really strong light on the car.
What the fuck?
We're like, should we leave? Like, can we get shot? Like, should we leave? And I'm like, yes, let's go. Like, what do we do? What? We just ran.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, those fields, man. You don't know. You don't know who's there.
Ugh. I just love how wholesome you guys were being. Like, let's look at the stars. Let's look at the stars, everybody.
Yeah, we just wanted to park and like, we've never seen stars. Like, as in, you're from LA. Like, come on. You don't see stars.
Yeah, of course.
But no. Man, I feel kind of like justice was not served.
Nope.
Not cool.
No, it was not served. But also, it's not like people like live wholesome, good lives. Just the fact that they got away with this doesn't mean that they got away for very long. Also, there's a rumor that, which I think is just a rumor because who can keep a secret, is that the posse that came and discovered the house empty actually caught them all and like hung Ma, Pa, and John Jr. and then burnt Kate at the stake. So there's a rumor that happened, and then they just all kept it a secret.
Ooh.
So there's like that rumor, but like I mean, think about
I can live with that theory.
Generationally now, how could that still be a secret? How would, like that would have gotten out 100%. I just think they disappeared into the West and were just part of the West.
But not together.
Probably not together. You can't travel as four when you're known as four, so they would have definitely had to split up. And maybe that's the biggest punishment of all. They lost the only people that ever understood them, each other. They only understood each other. And then they could never be together again.
And their need to kill.
And that's how you have empathy, folks. All you do is learn on Scary Mystery Surprise. That's all you do.
Glad to be of service, you guys. I hope you leave us a review because of that.
Yeah, leave us a review. We're of service to you. You be of service to us.
Yeah, if you're on a car right now, just pull over. Take out the phone and just tap it. Like just tap that. Follow, little plus sign.
Yep.
There you go. That's all we need.
All you need to do. Anyway, what are we going to talk about next week, Edwin?
I don't know. I think it'll be a surprise.
Ooh. Bye, guys.